The lifeline in palmistry is one of the major palmar lines. It's one of three major palmar lines in the palm, and it works its way down from in between the thumb on the palm's edge towards the wrist, and it's in this direction that we read this line. In this video, I'm going to discuss all of the palmar markings commonly associated with the lifeline and how to read them and what these things mean. And at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about two massive misconceptions in palmistry, which are very common, and I want to sort of iron out what those means and provide some clarity there. Now, the higher up the lifeline begins on the palm towards Jupiter, the index finger, it shows a more ambitious approach to life, a self-centered, prideful, ambitious, and single-minded approach towards life. And often when you see that high rising sort of lifeline, the inner Mars qualities and the Jupiterian qualities are intensified. Expect to see a larger, more well-developed mount. Expect to see perhaps a longer, thicker Jupiter finger and or pronounced Jupiter mount as well. It intensifies these ambitious and go-getting, naturally aggressive drives within people. And when you see the opposite, the lifeline starting lower to the thumb, inner Mars will be smaller, and so the opposite is true. You can expect to see a weaker sort of determination and a kind of a more sort of happy to be, not part of decision making, and happy to be quite a sort of low station in life, willing not to make a fuss in order to get what they deserve really out of the situation. At the same time, though, they are very considerate people, and so there's the flip side there. There's always a pro and a con. So, as you might imagine, the ideal lifeline starts actually in between, right in between, and the scales will be balanced in between someone sort of thinking about themselves and others. The drive, determination, and ambition won't get in the way of others that way, and they're kind of they won't be thinking about themselves too much or too little. So the lifeline creates the boundary for the mount of Venus, and in doing so, when we have one that's quite sort of small and cuts in closely to the ball of the thumb, then that too reduces the ability for compassion and warmth and a capacity to love. But it's not just compassion that is reduced, it's passion as well. When we see a lifeline that veers largely, swings right outside, almost into lunar, then we see that the spirit of adventure is great within that person, and also their sense of desire to put themselves out there in the world and to make these sort of bold choices and explore these things are strong within these sorts of people. And also, generally speaking, when we see that, and then when we also see a large well-developed amount of Venus, then we also see a greater deal of vitality and constitution as well. Now, with Venus being this area of stability, family, home, friendships, the comforts of the familiar, when we see a lifeline that tucks right in around the ball of the thumb, it doesn't matter how far that this person roams in life, they'll always feel the home yearning, for their own bed at night. It won't seem to, they might go off camping, but they will always be appreciative of their own bed. And it doesn't matter if they travel as well abroad, they will generally always end up dying in their native homeland because of the love of the familiar. And when we see a lifeline that veers outwards and there's a fork at the end, this means that a person will be torn between a difficult decision, and that decision is whether or not they will stay in their adopted country or return to their native homeland. Now, if the inner line here is stronger, then they return. We know what decision they will make, rightly or wrongly. and the same is true for the opposite. Now, one of the most common things I see on the lifeline in palmistry is a little sort of rising line up towards Jupiter at the age of around about 16, especially with people in the UK. In America, it's a tiny bit later on, and that's because this is an achievement. It's an effort line. It's an ambition line, but it's also an effort line. It suggests success in a personal achievement, and mostly you see it at around about this sort of these teenage years heading towards Mercury. And Mercury is this place of learning, calculations, memory, language, and so it's academia. And it's very common to see that at around about this age. So the short lines are minor achievements, the longer lines are greater ambitions achieved. And then again, when you see an ambition line that reaches right up onto the Jupiter finger itself, it's an ambition that a person always knew they had, even from a very early age. And quite often you see an ambition line, even though it's long, they don't fully realize consciously what it is they should be doing with their life. And this ambition is quite often realized after the age of 35. For so many of us, 35 is that kind of pinnacle year. For so many of us, 35 or around about that age is a karmic year. And the lifeline in palmistry, I mean, if we see it sort of tucked in quite closely like this on the left hand, but it swings out larger on the right hand, then that shows us that a person may have had sort of overbearing parents and feels an obligation to restrict themselves in their domestic life for whatever reason. Perhaps they feel obligated towards their parents still, but after the age of 35, because on the dominant hand or on the right hand we see the lifeline swinging out a bit more, their sense of adventure and freedom has greatened, and so they make that choice after that kind of midway point in life to live their life to a more sort of fuller extent. Now, lines reaching up to the Saturn mount, the place of duty, hard work, it's the same mount that the career line reaches up towards. And that is because our career line or fate line is bound by our projects, our desires, and what we feel our path is in life, and that's tied to the money that we make, because it's through our efforts that we get paid. So when a line reaches up towards this Saturn mount from the lifeline, it suggests a financial reward for some sort of achievement. So achievement of finances through our efforts, because it's still an effort line. All lines rising up from the lifeline are effort lines. It's where they reach and how they reach them, and in what way, what's affecting that line on that course, how far it travels, that matters. And so a minor line reaching up towards Saturn in this way is a minor amount of finances or wealth received through efforts, and the longer that line, the greater that effort and that wealth achieved. Now, a line reaching up towards Apollo, it suggests some achievements through our talents. Now, Apollo is the sunshine in our life. It's the sunshine in itself. It's what makes us shine. It's our talents. It's happiness, peace, prosperity, stability. But more than that, it's our talents, and it's our security as well. And so when a line reaches up in this way, it suggests that we have made an achievement in some sort of talent and an ability. It's more, when it comes to the ulnar side of the palm, we're more discussing areas of how we unconsciously show ourselves off to the world. So yes, it's talent, but then it's also reputation as well. So it could be an achievement in some way that's related to reputation and how we're perceived by others and how we feel we're perceived by others. But also it could be an achievement in some sort of creative endeavor or artistic endeavor. So obviously, the longer this line, then the greater the achievement. Now, an effort line that reaches up towards Mercury, and I've kind of already touched on this, is a sign of academic success, business science, learning, and depending how far down on the lifeline you see it, corresponds to what that might mean exactly. So for later on in life, so something like this sort of age, about 40s, mid 40s, mid to late 40s, then we see an achievement in business or science in some way. And obviously, the longer the line, the more that means for that person. And when we see a line that reaches right up on towards Mercury, well, it's beyond an effort line. This is actually a Mercury line in itself, and we see this on the hands of superb businessmen and people that have keen instincts. We see it on a particular type of person, and I've done a video recently on Elon Musk. We see it on his palm, and I believe I also have seen it on Vladimir Putin's palm as well, so check out those videos. Now, lines that sweep downwards from the lifeline, these sort of hairline sweeping lines, downward lines in palmistry or anything obstructing is generally negative in nature, and that's what this means. This is shows a sign of sort of physical weakness in some way, but it's important to look at how those lines end. Perhaps they thicken, perhaps they are thicker at the start of it and then they trail off weaker. It's important to understand the nature of the lines, where they start, where they end, and why, and what comes before and after. It's always so important to look at things holistically in palmistry. And it's quite common as well for people to mistake these sort of sweeping hairlines, these tassels, if you like, at the end of the lifeline for travel later on in life, whereas actually this is the person's constitution weakening towards the end of their life. But note that the lifeline itself is a representation of the possible. It's not for certain, especially further down the road. The further away, the more uncertain. These lines change all the time. So really, it's not to say, well, where the lifeline stops is not necessarily when an indication as to exactly when they will die, and that's one of the kind of misconceptions in palmistry, and I'm going to elaborate on that at the end of this video. And so a heavy line that's noticeably swinging out towards Luna like this is a desire for change. Now, the lifeline isn't just a person's constitution and vitality and their health. It's so much more than that. It's their environment as well. And so indications for finances can be seen on this line as well, because finances affect our environment and our ability for freedom as well. And so this line that swings out towards Luna, the place of travel, it's an expanse of water. When we travel, we generally have to cross massive expanses of water, but it also shows the outer world as well, and our ability, desires to show ourselves off to the world and put ourselves out there. And so that's what this line shows us, a desire for change, great change to our environment. And this desire can be perceived in several ways. When we look at the chirognomy of the palm, that is the shape of the palm and the fingers, as well as the texture of the palm itself, the resilience, the physical springiness of the palm, as well as the color, it's important to note that if we see a long first phalanx of the thumb, so let's say that it's this long, and then we also see this desire for change, then we know that this is extensive travel. When we see it on a palm that's very soft and sort of flabby and a bit clammy, then we know that this line, especially if it sweeps out really long, it's more fantasy. It's more a desire for change in a way that's appealing to an imaginative nature, and it could be something that's a bit more undesirable, escapism perhaps. And this is why it's always just so important to look at the shape of the palm of the fingers before we look at the chirology, and that is the study of the palmar, the deeper palmar lines, because it's from these templates that we can build a clearer picture, and it allows us to provide a more sort of accurate conclusion and diagnosis. So that's why I personally am just so big on chirognomy, and that's why I look at the chirognomy first before looking at the chirology. Now, when we see lots of interfering tiny little sort of hairlines obstructing the life's path, it's important not to read these lines as individual events and obstructions, because you'll see this on what's referred to as a many-lined hand, and that is a person who is very anxious, very nervous, physically and mentally often. Generally, it's seen in the palms of people who are very emotionally sort of sensitive, and so guidance here is required to for peace of mind and to stop thinking so much. Easier said than done, and that's actually terrible advice, but in a way it's also not. When we think in the future, we live in fear, and so trying to provide ways to prevent doing that is definitely preferable. But what that sign does tell the palmist is a lot about the person's nature. And again, this is another clue as to how to read the palm and how to better provide a more accurate conclusion when looking at certain areas of the palm. So when we see an obstacle, a more sort of a major line sweeping across the lifeline coming from the Mount of Venus, it shows an obstacle that's related to the family, that's close to home, could be friends, closer to the kind of more domestic sphere. And when we see that same line affecting the fate line or the career line, we see an interference from this person's lifestyle or environment or family or home coming to affect their place of work, their place of business, affecting their ability to make money, essentially. Now, if we see a line that obstructs the fate line and the headline and lands sort of halfway between the head and the heart line, we know that this is an interference that it's come from close to home, that affects the business, affects this person psychologically, and it's a great interference and a great sort of loss as well, and detrimental, and probably has huge financial repercussions as well. And it could be that this person has had to take time off work because someone in the family has died, something extreme. And again, you have to look at other signs in the palm to find out what something like this means if you see it. And when you see a line that cuts from inside the Venus mount, so it doesn't necessarily have to do that, it is certainly more impactful to the home life if it does, cuts across all the three major palmar lines, the life, the headline, the heart line, and the person's career, and then also the sun line as well, and it works its way up onto or in between Apollo and Mercury mount. It shows a serious event of misfortune that is likely linked to close relations, that has affected all areas of life. And this is so often interpreted to me as a divorce that's come out in the open, that everybody knows about, that there's a feeling of shame and regret here, and it's money's dragged into it, it's gone through the courts, the children have been affected by it as well. So this, for me, it's a change line, essentially. I mean, I wouldn't call this, you might be thinking, well, okay, is this not just what you said before as an effort line? No, you'll notice the difference, because one line reaches up and passes, whereas another line, as the one I just mentioned, cuts through and affects, and you can see the intention of the line. And again, you have to look at the clarity of the line, the strength of it, where it begins, how it ends, and what's occurring around these things. So it's about looking at it with a certain approach to understand the nature. Sometimes the hand will just sort of say, what am I trying to tell you? And all too often for me, I look and I can't figure it out, and then all of a sudden it makes perfect sense and everything falls together. And so that's what that means. It's quite often divorce, especially when it kind of cuts in from the inside. It cuts deep. It literally cuts deep at the person. And a loyalty line is this kind of line that you'll kind of see running from the side of inside of their home and their stability and what's close to them. And when you see that line cutting that lifeline hard, hitting that lifeline hard, often that shows heartbreak, loss in love. And so when you see a similar thing like that, you just know that that's a severely impactful kind of divorce type of event in a person's life, where love is lost as well as a lot of other relationships affected in the person's life. Now, lines that come from deep within inside the mount of Venus and cross the lifeline and touch the headline is often a sign that the body has been affected in some way, and it can be a broken bone. It can be an injury in some way, a blow to the head, perhaps. The vitality and constitution is affected, but it's also jarred them and had some sort of effect on the kind of psychological makeup. It's a physical enough of an impact to affect their confidence, so to speak. Now, similarly, when we see a line that does this but forms an island on its path, it's more around an accident that occurs, and there's a sense of misfortune attached to the person that caused the accident. So it could be that if you see it on a person's palm, it might be that they have been involved in a car accident, and it was themselves driving, or perhaps a friend, and they can no longer drive or feel that they can drive, or I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to provide an example here. Perhaps there's a great feeling of resentment towards that person, and that affects that person greatly. But generally speaking, what we see on a person's palm, it shows us how it affects that person, whether internally or externally. The right palm will show you external factors. Now, I don't want to get too depressive here, but this sign here is a very bad accident, shall we say, and there will be other signs on the palm that also corroborate with this exact same event. So it's important to look for those to determine just how serious this is. And when we see another kind of an obstacle that's, again, misfortune, but it has a star along its course. Now, remember, this is not a star, is it? This is a cross. If it has 5 points or more, it's a star. And it doesn't count if it's connected or, part of the convergence of another line. It's important to understand that in order for a marking to classify as a particular marking, it needs to meet that criteria, and that is, in this case, for it to be completely isolated. A star needs to have 5 points or more, and it needs to be isolated. So, and I'm telling you this, I'm being specific because I don't want anyone to misdiagnose, because this kind of sign is extremely serious. So this is an accident where death is involved. A person may well have seen or have affected the death of someone else. Now, a line that swings out from the inside of the mount of Venus and ends in a star on Luna is potentially a sign of suicide. And again, it's important to look at the palm to understand the nature of the person before kind of drawing any conclusion. I mean, I say this a lot. You can never diagnose from one sign or symptom alone. And it can be, the palm shows us potential for decisions and outcomes. It doesn't show us exactly what's going to happen. The palm shows us, I believe, a map for future potential possibilities, infinite potentially. Some people, certainly I feel, have a greater predestiny than others, but nothing is completely set in stone. That's my personal belief. So dots seen on the lifeline like this, just as an example, are a sign of illness. And if you see any kind of ill health in the palm, it's important to find out exactly what that is, and you'll need to look in other areas. There'll be other signs, the skin ridge patterns, the heart line. I mean, really, this is for another video, but again, you have to look at other signs to sometimes one clue will point you in the direction of another. But this is a sign of illness, and you might see it in just one small patch on the lifeline, and that shows throughout that period in that person's life, they have that kind of that period of illness. Islands on the lifeline are obstructing the flow of energy, and it's often periods of ill health, but then it can also be some sort of environmental obstruction that's stressful within the kind of domestic life. And often, if you see it in just the non-dominant hand, it can be inherited illness from a parent. So if you don't see it in the right hand, it may not practically physically affect the person, but they might be genetic carriers for a certain disease or condition. It can also, if it's only found in the minor hand or the non-dominant hand, then it can be a sign that the parent was in sort of poor health. They because the lifeline we inherit from our parents, it's an exact sort of copy of our parents' lifeline, and it changes over time according to all sorts of factors. Environment, diet, and just how we bring ourselves up. And if that chain is seen in both hands, then it's potentially an inherited kind of condition or illness, but it certainly affects the person physically. It's disease or illness or condition that affects them. And again, you need to look at other areas of the palm to find out exactly what that is. Now, breaks in the lifeline are generally a jarring incident. This is what a break looks like, and it can be an accident. It can be not necessarily to the person. It can be an accident to someone else, someone close to them, and it affects them. That affects their life, quite physically, literally. If it's found in the left hand and not the right, then it could well be. If it's found in the non-dominant hand anyway, then it's still serious, but not as serious. If the break is found on both the left and the right hand at the same time, then it could be something quite serious. But I would never jump to any conclusions about what that could be exactly. Again, it's about looking at the entire picture. It's a serious accident, likely anyway, but it's important to look for these sorts of repair lines. Now, I wouldn't call that a Mars line. If we saw a line, assisting the lifeline this far down on the palm, I wouldn't call it a double lifeline. I wouldn't call it a Mars line. I'd call that a sister line, I suppose, but it's assistance is what it is. And sometimes it's referred to as a repair line. It's assistance because something is running along, a force is running alongside this person's, their flow, their path's life, and it's assisting them, it's helping them, it's aiding them in some way. So if we saw a break like this and then a repair line, if you like, then we know that there's a factor involved around helping this person through this jarring accident or incident or illness. It could even mean that their actions were, prevented something from happening. That could be what it means. Now, when we see a square on the lifeline, squares are preservative, protective. They're signs of safety. and that's what they allow for. They're excellent signs in palmistry. I've done a whole video on, well, not a whole video, but the signs of, squares in the palm. But when we see, so if we saw a square on the inside of the lifeline like this, it can often mean hospitalization, or it can mean imprisonment even. The person's life, their environment has been boxed off, quite literally. They're not going to escape their situation, but they're also safe, if that makes sense. And it can sometimes mean imprisonment in the person's home. They could be sort of kept at their own will. Perhaps they have an abusive partner. It's important, again, to look at all of the signs. But when we see a box that is created on top of the lifeline, this is kind of a rare marking, and the lifeline kind of travels through it like this, and there's a bit of a break, it shows us that the danger, or whatever it was, it's not an illness. It's caused by a person. It's not natural, and whether intentional or otherwise. So again, check for these so-called repair lines. And it's interesting to me because when you see, a Mount of Venus, oh, there we go. See these lines here that run quite deep along the Mount of Venus itself. This shows, for this person, two very strong friends. And so that's kind of what these repair lines symbolize. It can be that these close friends have come to their assistance during this time. Now, I'm going to talk about something here because this is the part in the video where I'm talking about a misconception in palmistry, and this frustrates me because it can be quite a damaging conclusion that some amateurs might make. Now, this is not a break in the lifeline. This is an overlap. An overlap is completely different to a break. And what this means is, it's the difference between the change in the person's environment and a serious accident. And that's why it frustrates me, because the diagnosis, the conclusion couldn't be any more different. And so that's what this means. We have here this person chooses to live a more sort of reclusive lifestyle. They change their environment and become a bit more sort of isolated. Perhaps they play a bit safer. Maybe they earn a less money in a new role. And again, look for signs of change in other areas of the palm that corroborate. That's what palmistry is. Just, it's never plain sailing. It's never. Every palm is extremely difficult in one way or another to read. They all have their own difficulties. So if we see an overlap in the lifeline in this sort of scenario, where the lifeline becomes more sort of tucked inside, restricts the amount of Venus in some way, that's what this shows. This person is playing it a bit safer. If we see the opposite, then the opposite is true. It shows a person has changed their environment. They've moved away, perhaps, and they've started a new role that puts themselves out there a bit more. It's a bit of a risk, perhaps. It's a bolder move. They're more they're socializing, perhaps more in their new role. They're more out there in the world. So you can see the big differences between a break and an overlap, and that was one of the massive misconceptions around the lifeline. I really wanted to clear that up. Now, when we see a break where the lifeline reaches in towards the Mount of Venus, and this is a break because there's no overlap here, it shows us that if we can't see any signs of illness at the time that this is predicted to happen, we can only assume that it's an accident, and it's something a bit more severe that affects home life as well. I don't like to be negative, but you could make some sort of assumption that this was some sort of accident would mean that other family members have to step in, and it affects a lot of people greatly. And the other huge misconception around the lifeline I really wanted to clear up is the length of the lifeline. It does not show us an accurate depiction of a person's length of life. It shows us the possibilities, but more than that, the length of a person's lifeline shows us actually more realistically the length of their parents' life, because again, it shows us we inherit our lifelines from our parents, and so who they are most like, who they have inherited most from, it's more likely to show how long their parents will live for. And that's a weird one in palmistry, but it shows us the possibilities. I've seen people with short lifelines live long lives, and long lifeliners live to very short ages. So it has no bearing on the length or the longevity of a person's life. Now, a double lifeline, it's difficult to really read this one, partly because they're actually fairly rare, but what they generally mean, and are mostly confused with a Mars line, or vice versa, a Mars line is confused with a double lifeline. Generally speaking, you'll see actually it's a Mars line. So a double lifeline, you'll tell by its beginning and its destination, the strength of it, the length of it, if it's a double lifeline. Again, this was seen on the hand of Elon Musk. You see it on the palms of people who, yes, they live double lives, but they are usually highly ambitious. They are working on a side project. They might have two jobs. Often, remember, the lifeline is environment as well as vitality and constitution, virility. So it's more than just the person's health and, you know, their immune system and their love life and things like that. It's more than the home. It's also their environment. And so when we see a double lifeline, often it's a person who is assisted by some sort of environment, someone who has a trust fund, someone who is looked after by their parents financially, or their partner. Often I've seen double lifelines on people who have a partner who earns a lot more money than them, and they support them financially in that way. Sometimes it's people who start a business venture and they become entrepreneurs, and it's because they're kind of living this double life. They're living, they wake up, they work until the moment they go to sleep, and that's, you know, they live and breathe work. And so the lifeline kind of doubles because it has there's two paths to their environment. There might be an extremely sort of complex and demanding home life as well as work life. So these things have to be taken into consideration. Sometimes in palmistry, you have to ask a question in order to answer one. But as I say, very often the lifeline, it can be confused for portions of the fateline. The Mars line can get confused with it as well. So I think I'm going to stop there, but that is all I wanted to say on the lifeline and how to read it, and I hope that you've all gained something from this. And I just wanted to say, you know, thank you so much for watching my videos. I really appreciate it, and I've got a few of you now who I know that keep coming back, and you're all saying such nice things, and it really means a lot to me. If you've learned from this, or if you've got any questions at all, please drop me a comment or send me an email. If you've got a concern about your own lifeline, I do free readings on YouTube, but my waiting list is huge. Just send me a picture in an email and I will clear something up. If you're scared that you've been told you've got a break, maybe you've got an overlap instead. So let me know what you think. Please subscribe. Thank you so much for all your subscriptions. I'm very close to actually making some money off these free palm readings now, and trying to teach people through these how to read your own palm videos. So I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I will see you on the next one.